The keys of the kingdom of God are committed unto man on the earth, and from thence shall the gospel roll forth unto the ends of the earth. Know ye not that I, the Lord your God, have created all men, and that I remember those who are upon the isles of the sea, and that I rule in the heavens above and in the earth beneath, and I bring forth my word unto the children of men, yea, even upon all the nations of the earth.
Hello and kia ora. I'm Sid Going. I'm like a lot of New Zealanders in that I can trace my family history to both Māori and European. I love that heritage and that I've been able to work the land that my family have farmed for generations and that I can now pass that on. As I look back, I have to say that I'm truly grateful for so many things. That I have a wonderful family, that I've been able to represent my country as an All Black, and also my church as a missionary.
So, when were you an All Black?
A little while ago, before any of you were born.
When you were a missionary, Grandpa Sid, did you wear a white shirt and badge?
Did you ride a horse?
Well, I served my mission in Canada when I was 19. I did wear a white shirt and badge, but I didn't ride a horse. But I can tell you some stories about some Latter-day Saint missionaries from a long time ago who did ride horses and sailed in ships just to come to New Zealand to preach the gospel. Let's go inside, shall we? So the first story is about 3 young men that lived in Karori, near Wellington, in about 1850. Their names were Frederick and Charles Hurst, and their friend Thomas Holder. When they were about 19, these boys heard about the gold rush in Australia, so they decided to find gold for themselves.
And did they find it?
They did find some, but then they found something that they thought was even more priceless than gold. They went to a meeting where a missionary from America was teaching, and he taught them about the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. He told them about Joseph Smith and how he was younger than them when he prayed to know which church was true and received an actual visit from God and Jesus Christ. Not only that, he was told where to find some very special gold plates that had stories of ancient prophets and people who had lived in America. He was given the ability to translate the ancient writings into English.
The Book of Mormon.
That's right. So in a way, they did find gold because they were baptized. After a while, Fred and Charles decided to go to Zion in America. They'd heard that thousands of saints were travelling there from England and Europe, and they wanted to join them. But young Thomas stayed in Australia until October 1854. Then he came back to New Zealand with the mission president Augustus Farnham and another missionary, William Cook, to see if it was time to begin preaching the gospel here. They arrived in Auckland by sailing ship and docked at Onehunga. They went to preach in the city and found people quite interested in what they had to say. Even ministers of other religions came to listen. But something very special happened when they finally got to Karori and met Thomas's family. They were very happy to see him, and after a few days, he helped Brother Cook to teach them the gospel.
Oh, I know the story. Thomas's mother Martha and his sister Louisa accepted the gospel and asked to be baptised. They were the very first people baptised in New Zealand. After the baptism, the local people in Karori called that place at the end of the Karori Road Mormon Gully.
Within 6 months, 8 more people joined the church, and in 1855 the first branch of the church was formed at Karori.
Only 10 people? That's not many.
No, there weren't many, but they were very faithful. For the next 10 years after President Farnham went back to Australia, they didn't have any contact with other church members, but they still had services and loaned books to friends. In fact, one friend was the local school teacher, Henry Ellington. Henry became so committed to the church that he taught people as a missionary for 2 years and had 12 people, including himself, ready for baptism when President Beauchamp came to visit from Australia in 1870. Something else had happened in Christchurch, though, during that time. In 1864, a jeweller named Carl Asmussen found a tract written by Lorenzo Snow called The Only Way to Be Saved. He read it and felt so strongly about the truth of it that he tried to find other church members in Christchurch and couldn't. So Carl left New Zealand by sailing ship and went to England, to the mission address on the pamphlet. He found the missionaries and was taught and baptised and ordained an elder. When he came back to New Zealand, he met 2 brothers, William and James Burnett, and he baptised them as soon as they got back to Kaiapoi in Christchurch. They led the church there for many years.
So did the people in Christchurch know about the people in Karori?
Not at first, but they soon got in touch with President Beauchamp in Australia. There were only 9 baptised members in New Zealand when he arrived on April 8th, but when he left a month later, he had baptised 41 people and organised 2 branches of the church in Karori and Kaiapoi.
So are the families of those early saints still here in those places?
A few, but many of the early members ended up leaving New Zealand and travelled by sailing ship to America. You see, the church was so new here that they were persecuted a lot by their neighbours. When they held a meeting, they would often be pelted with rotten eggs and have rocks thrown at their homes. So they decided to heed the prophet's call to gather to Zion and join the thousands of saints already migrating to Utah.
Did they ever come back, like Kala Mission?
Actually, some of them did come back as missionaries, like Fred and Charles Hurst. They had settled in Utah and married, but they were called back as missionaries in 1875. They left their families for 2 years and come to preach the gospel.
Did they wear name tags like you, Grandpa Sid?
No, they didn't have name tags then. But there's another special story about how the people knew exactly who they were, especially the Māori people.
So we were talking about the prophecies from the Maori chiefs, weren't we? Way back in 1830, a Maori chief from Mahia named Arama Toiroa was getting confused because there were many different missionaries coming from England. But they were all from different churches and seemed to actually argue with each other. After a lot of pondering, Arama predicted that the true church would come from the east and that its ministers would pray with arms raised to the square.
And that's exactly how the early Latter-day Saint missionaries did pray, with both arms raised to the air.
And they came from the east across the Pacific from America, whereas all the others had come from the west across the Atlantic from Europe. Then 15 years later, Chief Pakahia prophesied almost exactly the same as Toiroa. Then in 1877, another chief, Apiata Kuikainga, prophesied that an unborn child would later do work for his people who had died.
Like we do in the temple.
Exactly like that. Only the chief didn't know then what it meant. But he recognised it after he met the missionaries, and they told him about saving our families who have passed on.
But that wasn't all. In 1879, a chief in another part of the country, King Tawhio, prophesied that the true church would come from white men from across the sea, who would preach to the Maori people, but they wouldn't be paid with money, and its ministers would go 2 by 2, and that they would dine, live and talk with the Maori people. He even prophesied that a temple of God would be built at Hamilton.
And probably the most famous prophecy came 2 years later near Masterton. A large group of Māori leaders held a meeting, and they talked about how there were so many different beliefs and practices among the Christian churches. They wanted to know which one they should belong to.
That's exactly the same as Joseph Smith, when he didn't know which church to join.
That's exactly right. And Joseph prayed for an answer, and so did the chiefs. Their most respected chief, Paul Tangaroa, then fasted and prayed to know the answer. After 3 days, he prophesied that the true church would come from missionaries who would travel in pairs, come from the rising sun, and that they would teach the Māori people in their own language.
So how soon after did the missionaries come?
Well, that would be about 1878, after the Māori-Pākehā Wars had finished. And an elder named Thomas Shreve arrived in Christchurch, and they've been missionaries in New Zealand ever since.
And did they do all the things the Māori chief said they would?
They did. And over the next few years, it was like lots of ripples spreading from a single drop of water. Many of the Maori people recognised that, and whole families and sometimes communities were baptised. In December 1883, the first All Maori branch was organised at Papawai in the Lower Wairarapa. Elder William Bromley, who was the mission president, said after baptising several Maori, "These are people of influence and very intelligent."
You know how the Mormon church is run by the members rather than by paid ministers? Well, some people wondered if the new Māori saints would really understand how the church should be run. Joseph Smith once said that we should teach people correct principles so they can govern themselves. And that's just what happened here. The missionaries spent many, many hours teaching the new converts, using both the English and the Māori Bible to show them correct principles and prove the truth of the gospel. The Māori people also had an intense love of family and whakapapa, so they really liked it when the missionaries taught them about the principle of eternal families and how families are meant to be together forever. They hadn't heard that before. And when they were taught about the plan of salvation, they realised that this was a message full of hope, not damnation. So more and more were baptised in the Hawke's Bay area, and the people prospered. One elder even wrote in his journal, "Here in Hawke's Bay are some very rich natives belonging to the church, and all come riding in the finest kind of buggies drawn by stylish and spirited horses. They have large farms that they cultivate in wheat, oats, potatoes and vegetables." By the end of 1884, there were 1,076 members of the church in New Zealand, and 3/4 of them were Māori.
Do they have a Māori Book of Mormon?
That happened about 2 years later. The Maori people really wanted the book in their own language. In 1887, Elder Ezra F. Richards and Elder Sondra Sanders were set apart to translate the Book of Mormon into Maori. It took 6 months of hard work, and Maori leaders like Henry Potai, Puripi Te Maire and John A. Drury helped to translate difficult passages and with revision. Sister Katie Paxman and Sister Georgiana Marriott assisted with copying